We're going to explore the ethics of artificial intelligence that every teacher should know about. In particular, we're going to focus on the guardrails of AI. We're going to look at data protection. We're going to look at issues around plagiarism, bias, and hallucinations. To begin with, then, we shall look at the guardrails. So, this is guardrails around AI that really helps ensure that, for example, children and even adults are not able to access inappropriate content. Also, allowing teachers and parents to have control over the resources and materials that children can access. Another aspect is we need to consider issues around transparency. So, how do we know the ways in which children are interacting with the AI? So, there are platforms that allow transcripts of those interactions between the AI and between the child to be made available to parents and to teachers so that we know that children are using it in a safe and appropriate way. Another part of AI is we wanted to help students to learn. We wanted to help them with their critical thinking. So we just need to be mindful that when we give children activities, we need to be giving them activities that's going to use AI to support their critical thinking, not used to be used instead of their critical thinking. And that way, then we're ensuring that they're using it to help them to learn and not necessarily to avoid having to learn. The next issue then is issues around data protection. With AI, they require huge volumes of data to be trained, and that also includes personal data. So, without proper safeguards, sensitive data can be exposed, and then the privacy of individuals can be violated. So, we need to be ensuring that individual rights and privacy are respected. Of course, AI is still subject to the GDPR legislation. And one thing really to be mindful of is that AI can still infer personal identity even when data have been anonymized. And the way it's able to do that is by cross checking, cross referencing with other data sets. That's something as a teacher we just really need to be very careful about. Now, of course, protecting children's data, and everyone's data for that matter, is crucial, but children are especially vulnerable. And of course, they're not fully going to fully understand the risks around privacy. AI systems need to get parental consent. They need to collect only data that are truly needed, and also they need to be transparent about how the data are used. From a school perspective, we need to be ensuring that students and parents are informed when AI is involved in marking, feedback, and assessment because it there are issues around bias with this, which we will consider later on. But we do need to inform parents and students that when we as teachers are using it in certain ways, particularly around assessment. The next issue is the issue of plagiarism. This is the idea of passing off work of others as one's own. Now, this is not a particularly new issue for educators, but AI does pose some additional challenges. The first one being that AI generated content is really difficult to detect. So, an AI can't even detect if it itself generated that content. And secondly, the issue around what plagiarism is has become blurred with the use of AI. For example, is it legitimate to use an AI tool, for instance, to rephrase a sentence to improve prose? These are all questions we'd really need to be thinking about as educators and really making it clear to students where that line is. Now, the next issue is bias, and bias occurs when AI produces outputs that are prejudiced in some way because largely because of the data that we've input tends to be biased and we're making flawed assumptions and certain design choices around the algorithms. So this can lead to unfair outcomes for individuals or groups. When we're talking about those groups, talking about groups along the lines of gender, of race, and of disability as well. Now, this has implications. For example, data trained to recognize people's faces can end up, and is shown to be the case, misidentifying people of some races more than others, because the data that's been used to train the models have been trained on certain races, and less data is used for other races. So it tends to then misidentify those groups where less data have been used. Additionally, with employing people, algorithms that have been developed for hiring people and for job applications tends to be biased towards men because it's based and biased on past hiring data. So again, excluding women potentially from certain roles just in the way the algorithm has been set up. So all these things can be very serious and clearly be prejudiced against those groups of people. Now, hallucinations is the idea that generative AI makes stuff up. But the problem is, it not only makes it up, it does so with confidence. So if you are a child and you're confidently getting these responses back, then yeah, why would you not accept that as to be the truth? So here are just some nice examples here. So an AI once claimed that the internet was invented by Sir Reginald Clicksworth in the 19th century. Right? Now, this is kind of funny. It's kind of a nice example. It's so obviously wrong. We know that can't possibly be correct. So it's just a really nice, funny example. Okay, but what happens in a situation where it's not so clear that it's got it wrong? So quite often now with AI, it can generate mathematical proofs and solutions to mathematical problems that seem really logical, and it shows the steps, but it can contain really subtle errors. So even experienced maths teachers find it tricky to spot these flaws, let alone children who are still learning the area. So this, of course, if they're not identified, is going to lead to confusion, mislearning, and so that clearly is going to be very problematic. So, for example, in this situation here now, that this proof that 2 equals 1, most AIs now have managed to correct this and understand, in this particular example, they understand that this is a problem. So if you to put this into current AIs as they are, it should identify this now as being a false proof. But before, it would do this and assume that it was sort of a true proof. So now in this scenario, what we're doing is saying A equals 2 equals 1. So we go through the steps here, but essentially, I won't go through this in particular detail, but what happens is that on step 5, you're dividing by 0 effectively. And of course, you can't do that. So there is a falsehood within the logic there that would be hard for a child to spot. And of course, it could lead to mislearning, as we've talked about. But AI is getting better, and it's getting better at these in particular. But there's nothing to say that this couldn't happen in other situations with other examples. So this is the idea that a teacher who's expert can identify false content, but children just can't so easily recognize that false content. So we really need to teach children to critically evaluate the content generated by AI. And indeed, we really need to teach children all aspects around these ethics we've talked about. So the guardrails that's there to protect them and help them make sure they're not using AI and accessing material they shouldn't be accessing. They need to understand about data protection, but keeping their own data safe and how to ensure their privacy. We need to ensure that they're not going to be plagiarizing their work, that they know how to use it, they understand where the lines are, and also understanding issues around bias as well. So not only do teachers need to know these things, but also as teachers and educators, we need to ensure that children are also learning these as well.